Maya shifted her baby carefully in her arms as she stepped into the busy airport terminal. The little boy, only 8 months old, was already restless after the early morning drive. She tried to hush him softly, pressing her cheek against his tiny head, whispering gentle words that only a mother's voice could bring to life. Traveling alone with a baby was never easy, but today was even harder because this was her first flight in years. Maya's husband, Daniel, had insisted that she not worry. He had arranged everything perfectly, booking first-class seats so she could be comfortable with their child. But Daniel himself could not come. An urgent business meeting had called him away, promising he would meet her once she landed. Maya didn't mind. She was used to managing quietly, without asking for too much help. That was her nature, calm, patient, and always willing to handle things on her own. Still, as she looked around the crowded terminal, she felt a little nervous. People rushed by with their luggage, announcements echoed through the halls, and her baby stirred uneasily at the noise. She tightened her arms around him, whispering, "It's okay, we'll be on the plane soon." When boarding began, Maya was among the first to enter the aircraft because of her baby. She smiled politely at the flight attendants waiting at the door. Most of them smiled back, but one of them, Clara, gave her a look that felt sharp. Clara's smile was faint, almost forced, and her eyes lingered on Maya in a way that made her feel judged. Maya brushed it off. She wasn't someone who liked to make quick judgments. Maybe Clara was just tired from a long day. She found her seat, carefully arranged her baby's blanket, and sat down. The little boy reached for her necklace and giggled, making Maya smile despite the unease in her heart. Minutes later, Clara approached her row. "Ma'am," she said in a clipped tone, "you'll need to store that bag overhead. It cannot stay by your feet." Maya nodded politely. "Of course. But could you please help me? I can't lift it easily with the baby in my arms." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Other passengers managed," she said, glancing down the aisle, "you'll have to do the same." Maya blinked, surprised. Usually, flight attendants were willing to assist mothers traveling alone. She looked around helplessly, and thankfully a kind gentleman from the next seat offered to lift her bag. Maya thanked him warmly, but the interaction left her unsettled. As the plane began to fill with more passengers, Clara seemed to return again and again to Maya's seat. Each time her voice carried a note of impatience. "Keep the baby's blanket tucked in. Make sure he doesn't touch the tray table. Hold him tighter, he must not disturb other passengers." Maya tried her best. She adjusted the blanket, kissed her baby's head, and whispered stories into his ear to keep him calm. But babies were babies. At one point, he let out a soft cry, not loud but enough to make Clara turn sharply. "Ma'am," Clara said sternly, "you must keep him quiet. This is a premium cabin, and other guests expect peace." The words stung. Maya felt her cheeks grow warm. She rocked her baby quickly, murmuring lullabies, though her voice trembled slightly. Other passengers glanced over, but most of them looked sympathetic. They could see she was doing her best. One older lady leaned across the aisle and said kindly, "Don't mind her, dear. Babies cry. It's natural." Maya smiled gratefully, but Clara's eyes hardened further. It was clear she did not approve. The plane finally took off. The engines roared, and Maya's baby whimpered at the unfamiliar sound. She pressed him against her chest, humming softly. Slowly, he relaxed, his little fists clutching at her dress. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, exhausted already, but relieved that he was settling. But Clara returned once more, her tone sharper this time. "Ma'am, you need to control him better. We can't have disturbances the whole flight." Maya swallowed back her hurt. She had never been treated like this before. She opened her mouth to reply gently, to explain she was trying her best, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she just nodded, focusing on her baby. Inside, though, her heart ached. Why was Clara treating her this way? Was it because she was traveling alone? Because she didn't look as polished as the other first-class passengers? Maya wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly, no expensive jewelry except her small necklace. She didn't care for show, but now she wondered if she was being judged for it. Maya forced herself to stay calm. She kissed her baby's forehead, whispering, "We'll be okay. Just a few hours, then we'll see Daddy." The thought of Daniel waiting at the airport gave her strength. What Maya didn't know was that Clara's behavior was being quietly noticed. A businessman in the corner seat frowned at the exchange. The older lady who had spoken earlier shook her head. And in the rows behind, another passenger whispered to his neighbor about how unfair it seemed. The flight had only just begun, but already Maya felt it was the longest journey she had ever taken. She held her baby close, unaware that the truth about her husband and the airline itself would soon change everything. The plane had settled into steady flight, and most of the passengers were beginning to relax. Some leaned back with their headphones on, while others opened their laptops or flipped through magazines. The soft hum of the engines filled the cabin, creating a rhythm that usually calmed people. But for Maya, calm was hard to find. Her baby had drifted into light sleep, his little chest rising and falling against her shoulder, but her own heart was heavy. She could not forget the tone of Clara's words, sharp and unkind, each one cutting deeper than she expected. Maya had always been gentle by nature. She never liked to argue or defend herself loudly, even when things felt unfair. Her friends often told her she had too much patience. Yet now, sitting quietly in her seat, she felt a mixture of sadness and worry. She wondered if her baby would wake again and if Clara would come back with more complaints. From the corner of her eye, Maya noticed the older lady across the aisle still watching her. The woman gave her a reassuring smile and whispered softly, "Don't worry, dear. People sometimes forget how hard it is to travel with a baby. You're doing wonderfully." Those words touched Maya deeply. She whispered back a soft thank you, careful not to disturb her child. It gave her a little courage, a small reminder that not everyone was against her. Still, Clara's presence loomed. She passed by often, her eyes narrowing slightly each time she glanced at Maya. It felt as though she was waiting for another reason to correct her. As time passed, the baby stirred again. He made a soft whimper, not even loud enough to reach the back rows, but enough to wake Clara's attention. She approached quickly, bending slightly toward Maya. "Ma'am," Clara said, her voice firm, "please ensure he stays quiet. Other passengers have paid for peace and comfort." Maya blinked, surprised. She looked around. Most passengers were either sleeping or busy with their own things. No one seemed disturbed. Still, Maya gently rocked her child, whispering, "Shh, it's okay, little one." This time, however, something unexpected happened. The businessman seated a few rows away leaned forward and spoke clearly enough for Clara to hear. "Excuse me," he said calmly, "but I don't think anyone here is troubled. She's a mother. Babies make sounds, it's natural." A few other passengers nodded in agreement. The older lady gave a supportive smile. Maya felt a rush of relief, though she stayed quiet. Clara, however, looked taken aback for a moment. Her professional smile flickered, but then she straightened, saying only, "I will make sure the cabin remains peaceful." With that, she walked away. Maya let out a slow breath. She hadn't expected anyone to speak up for her, and her eyes grew moist with gratitude. She whispered to her baby, "See, kind people are everywhere." The flight continued, and meal service began. Trays rolled down the aisle, filled with warm food. When Clara reached Maya, her tone was polite but distant. She set down the tray with little care, the cup of water nearly spilling over. Maya murmured a soft thank you anyway, adjusting the tray carefully while keeping her baby secure. Eating with one hand while holding a child was never easy, but she managed small bites, her thoughts drifting to Daniel. He always insisted she should never hesitate to ask for help. If only he were here, he would have stood by her, shielding her from this quiet storm. Far away in another city, Daniel was finishing his meeting, checking his phone often for updates from Maya. He trusted she was safe, but he knew travel could be tiring. He had promised himself he would surprise her upon landing, meeting her at the gate instead of sending a driver. He wanted her to feel cared for, always. Back on the plane, Maya finally managed to settle her baby again. His tiny hands rested peacefully against her dress as he fell asleep. She gazed at his innocent face, feeling both exhausted and comforted. Children had a way of giving strength even in the hardest moments. But Clara's attitude had not gone unnoticed. The businessman, whose name was Mr. Lewis, observed everything quietly. He worked in corporate management and often traveled, so he understood the usual behavior of flight attendants. To him, Clara's constant sharpness toward Maya seemed unnecessary, even unprofessional. He leaned back in his seat, shaking his head slightly. Some people forget compassion, he thought. Hours passed, and the flight neared its halfway point. The cabin lights dimmed, encouraging passengers to rest. Maya closed her eyes briefly, holding her baby close. She didn't sleep, but she allowed herself to rest, listening to his steady breathing. In those quiet moments, her mind drifted to her life with Daniel. She remembered the first time they met, how kind he had been, how he always treated her with respect. He was a man who never raised his voice, who carried responsibility with dignity. Few people knew the full extent of his success, because he was humble. He rarely mentioned that he owned one of the largest airline companies in the country. Even Maya herself had been surprised when he first told her. But Daniel always said, "Titles don't matter. What matters is how we treat people, no matter who they are." That thought stayed with her now, as she sat quietly, facing an experience that reminded her how differently people could act. What Maya didn't realize was that Clara, in her eagerness to appear strict and professional, was unknowingly placing herself in a position she would soon regret. For when the plane landed, and Daniel came to greet his wife and child, the truth of who he was and what he owned would turn this entire journey upside down. For now, though, Maya held her baby close, unaware of the storm quietly building around her. Long before the world knew her as Maya Roberts, the powerful CEO who controlled billions, she had been just Maya, a little girl in a quiet neighborhood where survival was a daily challenge. Her mother, Ruth, worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day and serving in a small cafe at night. Her father had passed away when Maya was only 10, leaving behind memories of gentle advice and the sound of his old guitar. Life was not easy. The roof leaked when it rained, and winters felt colder inside than outside. Yet Ruth never let Maya lose hope. She often told her daughter, "We may not have much, but you must remember, respect is worth more than gold. Never let anyone take it away from you." Those words planted a seed in Maya's heart. At school, Maya was bright, curious, and determined, but not everyone saw her potential. Some teachers dismissed her, assuming her future was already written by the poverty she was born into. Classmates sometimes mocked her second-hand clothes or the homemade lunches she carried in a reused bag. Each unkind word left a mark, but Maya refused to let bitterness shape her. Instead, she turned every insult into silent fuel. She spent long evenings in the library, her hands moving quickly over worn-out pages. She studied not just her lessons but also books about leaders, business, and history. She learned about people who had risen from nothing to build empires. If they can do it, why not me? She told herself countless times. When she turned 18, Maya applied for her first job at a local office. She had polished her shoes, ironed her only formal blouse, and practiced answers to possible questions. But the interview ended quickly. The manager barely looked at her resume before saying, "We don't think you fit the image we want." She walked out with tears in her eyes, but also with a stronger will. Years passed, and she worked wherever she could, sometimes in small shops, sometimes cleaning desks in offices late at night. She saved every coin, telling herself that each step, no matter how small, was part of her climb. There were days she went without proper meals so she could afford extra classes in finance. Nights when her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she kept studying because she believed knowledge was her ticket to freedom. One memory stood out sharply in her mind. She had once been standing in line at a bank, waiting to deposit the little savings she had managed to gather. Two men behind her laughed, whispering, "What difference will a few dollars make? People like her will never make it big." Maya had turned her head slightly, meeting their eyes with quiet determination. She said nothing, but inside, she promised herself that one day, she would handle some so large that those men could never imagine. Her turning point came when she earned a scholarship for higher education. It was not handed easily. She had applied to dozens of programs, faced rejection after rejection, until finally one institution recognized her brilliance. At university, she was often the only woman in her finance classes. Professors tested her with harder questions, and some classmates doubted her abilities. But Maya never let those doubts define her. She excelled, topping her courses and gaining recognition for her sharp mind and steady patience. After graduation, she started working in a small investment firm. At first, she was given simple tasks handling files, doing calculations nobody else wanted to do. She accepted everything quietly but always added more value than expected. Slowly, she built trust. Her ideas began to be noticed, and soon, clients were requesting her by name. The road upward was steep. There were times when partners overlooked her in meetings, choosing louder voices instead. Yet, when their plans failed, Maya's careful strategies often saved the firm. She became known for her calm under pressure, for the way she could see opportunities where others saw only risk. Her reputation grew. Within a decade, she had started her own company. At first, it was small, with only a few employees and modest clients. But Maya treated each project with the seriousness of a billion-dollar deal. Slowly, word spread. Investors saw her as a safe pair of hands, someone who valued honesty as much as profit. Her company grew into a giant, managing billions across industries. Despite her success, Maya never forgot where she came from. She still visited her old neighborhood, donated to schools, and quietly helped struggling families. She remembered the child she had been, the girl in second-hand clothes, holding her mother's words close to her heart. And now, sitting in her quiet office after the store incident, those memories returned with force. The humiliation she faced in front of strangers was not new. It was another reminder of the many times society had tried to tell her she was less. But she had risen every time, not with anger, but with determination. Her hand touched the necklace she always wore, a simple silver chain her mother had given her before passing away. "Never forget your worth," Ruth had said. Maya whispered softly into the silence of her office, "I didn't forget, Mama. And I never will." The strength of her past was now guiding her present. The world thought they had witnessed a simple insult in a store. But what was coming next would show them the true meaning of dignity, power, and justice. The next morning, the world seemed different. What had happened in that single store was no longer a private moment between Maya and the store manager. It had become a story carried across phones, televisions, and newspapers. The video of Maya's calm silence spread like wildfire. Millions watched the clip again and again. They saw a woman humiliated, yet they also saw her strength in not reacting. People began writing comments, "This is what true dignity looks like." She stood taller without saying a word. Who is she? In homes, offices, and coffee shops, the question repeated, who was the woman in the navy skirt and cream blouse? By mid-afternoon, the truth began to surface. Reporters connected the dots, and soon headlines appeared: woman humiliated in store identified as Maya Roberts, CEO of global investment firm. The revelation shook the business world. Maya was not just any customer, she was one of the most powerful financial figures in the country. News channels ran the story non-stop. Anchors replayed the clip, then showed her achievements, her company's success, the billions she managed, the charities she supported. The contrast was clear: a woman who had lifted thousands through her work had been treated with disrespect inside a store that depended on customers like her. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the retail chain, panic spread through boardrooms. Executives watched the videos, their faces pale. "How could this happen?" one of them exclaimed. "Do you realize who she is? She controls investments worth billions," another said, rubbing his forehead. "If she decides to move her money, we could lose everything. And this isn't just about money anymore, this is about reputation." The CEO of the retail chain, Mr. Grant, called an emergency meeting. His voice shook with urgency. "Find that manager. Handle this immediately. If Maya Roberts speaks against us, the whole chain is finished." But Maya had not spoken. That was what frightened them more. She remained silent, letting the world draw its own conclusions. Her silence became more powerful than any statement. In her own office, Maya sat at her desk, reading reports Clara had prepared. She studied the chain's financial structure, their partnerships, their reliance on investors. Every page revealed weaknesses that few had noticed before. Clara stood nervously beside her. "The entire world is waiting for your response, Maya. Reporters are calling non-stop. Do you want me to release a statement?" Maya shook her head gently. "Not yet." Clara hesitated. "But people are demanding to hear from you." Maya looked up, her eyes calm but sharp. "Sometimes silence teaches more than words. Right now, the world is speaking for me. Let them." She closed the file and leaned back in her chair. Her thoughts were steady, not clouded by anger. She was not planning revenge, she was planning a lesson. A lesson that would remind the world about respect, responsibility, and the true meaning of leadership. Across the city, Alan, the store manager, sat alone in his office. His phone buzzed with messages, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. Every news channel, every social media post reminded him of the moment he wished he could erase. He had thought she was just an ordinary customer. He had been wrong. He replayed the moment in his mind, the way she had looked at him after the insult, her calm eyes holding something deeper than anger. It haunted him. For the first time in years, Alan felt small, not because of her power, but because of his own mistake. Back at Maya's office, the board of her own company gathered. Some of them were restless. "Maya, this is the time to speak out," one of the directors urged. "The people admire you. If you call for action, they will support you." Maya remained quiet for a long moment before replying. "This is not about calling for anger. This is about showing that respect cannot be bought, but it can cost everything if ignored." Her words settled in the room like heavy stones. Everyone understood she was preparing something bigger than a public statement. That evening, Maya walked through her home garden, the gentle wind brushing past the flowers. She thought about her mother's words, "Respect is worth more than gold." She whispered them again to herself, feeling their weight. The stars above glimmered as if listening. Maya lifted her face to the night sky and closed her eyes. "This is not just about me. This is for every person who has been looked down upon, every person whose worth was ignored." The next morning, she made her decision. She called Clara and said calmly, "Prepare a formal notice. Tomorrow, we will begin pulling our investments from the chain." Clara's eyes widened. "All of it?" "Yes," Maya said with quiet strength. "Every dollar. Every cent." It was not anger that guided her voice. It was justice. And so, while the retail chain scrambled in confusion and the world watched in suspense, Maya Roberts prepared to make a move that would shake the very foundation of the business world. The woman who had walked out of the store in silence was about to speak through action, and action louder than any words could ever be. The news broke on a bright Monday morning. It was only a single line at first, released by Maya's investment company. "Roberts Global has decided to withdraw all investments, totaling $5 billion, from the retail chain effective immediately." The words were simple, but their impact was like an earthquake. Within minutes, financial networks flashed the headline across their screens. Traders stopped mid-sentence. Investors stared at their phones in disbelief. Commentators struggled to find the right words. $5 billion, one anchor gasped during a live broadcast. "This isn't just a withdrawal. This is a thunderstorm hitting the entire retail industry." Inside the offices of the retail chain, panic erupted. Phones rang endlessly. Emails flooded in from shareholders demanding answers. The executives who had been confident only a week ago now sat in tense silence, staring at each other. Mr. Grant, the CEO of the retail chain, slammed his hand on the table. "How could we let this happen? Do you understand what this means? Our stock will sink. Our partners will back out. We could lose everything." Across the country, ordinary people watched with fascination. Many still remembered the video of Maya being humiliated in the store. To them, her action was not about money, it was about dignity. They saw her silence, then her quiet decision, as a lesson for everyone. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just walked out, a woman told a news reporter. And now, look, her action is shaking an empire. On social media, people praised her decision. Hashtags spread like waves, hashtag dignity first, hashtag respect matters, and hashtag Maya Roberts. Artists painted her image, writers shared essays about her strength, and young students began quoting her calm silence as a symbol of self-respect. Meanwhile, in Maya's office, things remained calm. Her employees worked steadily, their respect for her deeper than ever. Clara placed a fresh report on her desk. "The withdrawal is complete," she said softly. "The markets are already reacting. Their stock is down nearly 30%. Maya nodded, her face steady. "It is not about destroying them, Clara. It is about reminding them that respect is the foundation of every business. Without it, money means nothing." Clara hesitated. "Do you think they will come to you for forgiveness?" Maya looked out the window at the city skyline. "Perhaps. But forgiveness is not what they should seek. They should learn." In the following days, the retail chain's troubles multiplied. Investors began pulling their own money, fearing collapse. News reports highlighted not just Maya's withdrawal but also stories from other customers who had felt mistreated in the chain's stores. What began as one incident now grew into a movement. At a small cafe, two young employees whispered while watching the news on a tiny television. "Did you see? That one woman stood up without even raising her voice, and now the whole company is shaking. It's like she spoke for everyone who's ever been treated badly in a store," the other replied. "She gave us courage." Meanwhile, Alan, the store manager who had caused it all, sat at home, unable to escape the storm. His phone had not stopped buzzing since the announcement. He saw people calling him reckless, careless, and arrogant. He thought about Maya's calm face once more. It haunted him. For the first time, he began to understand the depth of the mistake he had made. Back in her home, Maya sat quietly in her garden during the evening. The flowers sway gently in the breeze, and the soft sound of birds filled the air. She closed her eyes, remembering her mother's voice, "Respect is worth more than gold." She whispered, "Mama, I hope they finally understand." But Maya was not finished. She knew her action was not only about money. It was about planting a seed of awareness. She began drafting letters to her fellow business leaders, reminding them that wealth should never blind companies from treating every customer with dignity. Her words were careful, but strong. The measure of a company is not in its profits, but in the respect it shows to the smallest of its customers. By the end of the week, the retail chain stock had dropped nearly 50%. Shareholders demanded answers. Mr. Grant called emergency press conferences, apologizing publicly and promising to change policies. But the damage had already been done. For Maya, this was not about revenge, it was about justice. She knew the world had witnessed something important, that power did not always need loud voices or anger. Sometimes, the quiet strength of a single decision could move mountains. And so, while the retail chain struggled to stay afloat, Maya continued her work calmly. She invested in companies that treated their customers with kindness. She supported programs that trained young managers in empathy and respect. She carried her mother's lesson into every step of her life. The world watched her, not just as a CEO, but as a symbol. She had shown that silence could be stronger than noise, and that dignity could be more powerful than wealth. But the storm was not over yet. The retail chain had not fully fallen. Their leaders still clung to hope, searching for ways to recover. And Alan, the manager at the center of it all, knew that his own journey was far from finished. The collapse of the retail chain did not happen in silence. It happened loudly, with news reports flashing across every television screen and articles filling newspapers day after day. At first, the company tried to hold on. They released statements promising new policies, better customer care, and more training for managers. But the world was not listening to promises anymore. Investors were still pulling out, and customers were boycotting their stores. Every day, long lines of shoppers grew shorter. Stores that were once crowded with families now stood half empty. Employees whispered about layoffs, and managers sent desperate emails asking for guidance. The chain that had once felt untouchable was now trembling on its knees. In the headquarters, Mr. Grant sat with his board of directors, his face pale. "Our stock is down 70%, one director said, his voice weak. "If this continues, we may not recover." Mr. Grant rubbed his temples. All this from one incident? One mistake? The room fell silent. They all knew it wasn't just one mistake. It was the proof of something deeper, that the company had lost touch with respect. The incident with Maya had simply pulled away the curtain for the world to see. Meanwhile, Alan, the store manager at the center of it all, could not escape his guilt. His name was known everywhere now. People pointed fingers when he walked down the street. Neighbors avoided his gaze. He had once been proud of his position, but now he could not even wear his uniform without shame. At night, he sat alone in his small apartment, replaying the moment again and again. The crowd's gasp, Maya's calm eyes, her quiet walk toward the door, it all haunted him. He wished he could go back and erase it, but life gave no such chances. He remembered his younger years, when he had first joined the company. He had been excited, eager to prove himself. But over time, pride had crept in. He had started looking down on customers, judging them by their clothes or their baskets. He realized now that every time he dismissed someone, he had chipped away at his own humanity. The incident with Maya was simply the moment when his arrogance finally broke him. Across the city, Maya continued her work without noise. She was not celebrating the chain's fall. There was no joy in watching thousands of employees worry about their jobs. She carried the weight of responsibility heavily on her shoulders. Yet she knew this moment was necessary. Sometimes change required a storm before new seeds could grow. One evening, Clara entered her office with a hesitant expression. "Maya, the CEO of the chain is asking to meet you. He says he wants to apologize in person." Maya looked up from her papers. Her eyes were thoughtful. "Apology is easy when the world is watching," she said softly. "But respect is proven when no one is." Still, she agreed to the meeting. Not for herself, but because she knew the lesson had to be clear. The next morning, Mr. Grant arrived at her office. He looked tired, older than his years, carrying the weight of a collapsing empire. He extended his hand nervously. "Miss Roberts, I want to apologize on behalf of my company. What happened was unacceptable. We are ready to do anything to make it right." Maya shook his hand politely but said nothing for a moment. Her silence was steady, not cruel, just thoughtful. Then she spoke in her calm voice. "Mr. Grant, respect cannot be bought with apologies or money. It must be built every single day, in every single store, with every single customer. Until your company learns that, no promise will save you." Mr. Grant lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. He realized her words were true. The collapse was not because of money, it was because people no longer trusted them. As the weeks passed, more stores closed. Employees searched for new jobs. Newspapers reported on the fall of the once great retail giant, calling it a lesson for the century. Analysts wrote articles with headlines like, "The Cost of Disrespect" and "How Silence Brought Down a Chain." Alan, too, tried to reach Maya. He wrote letters he never sent, words filled with regret and shame. He wanted to tell her that he finally understood that his actions had not only harmed her but had also destroyed his own future. But deep inside, he wondered if forgiveness was even possible. Maya, however, was not focused on revenge. She began using her influence to create something new. She funded training programs that taught young managers about empathy, kindness, and leadership through respect. She supported small businesses that treated customers like family. She carried her mother's wisdom into every project: respect is worth more than gold. The collapse of the chain became a story studied in business schools around the world. Professors told their students, "This is what happens when companies forget the human side of business." And for Maya, it became another chapter in her life, a chapter that reminded her, and the world, that dignity was the strongest power of all. But her journey was not yet complete. There was still one final step, a closing of the circle that would bring peace to everyone involved. Months passed, and the world still spoke about the fall of the great retail chain. What had once been a giant with stores across the country was now a shadow of itself, remembered not for its success but for its failure to value respect. Yet for Maya, life had moved forward with quiet purpose. She did not dwell on the collapse. Instead, she focused on building new paths. Her company had grown stronger, not because of money, but because people trusted her values. Customers, employees, and even strangers admired her not only as a CEO but as a woman who had stood for dignity without raising her voice. One afternoon, Maya visited her old neighborhood. The streets were the same: children playing outside, small shops selling fresh bread, and families greeting one another warmly. She walked past the library where she had spent so many nights as a child. Memories returned of the little girl who once dreamed of building a better life. An elderly woman approached her, carrying a basket of fruit. "Miss Roberts," she said softly, "thank you for what you did. You showed the world that every person deserves respect." Maya smiled warmly. "It was never about me," she replied. "It was about all of us." Meanwhile, Alan lived a very different life. After the chain collapsed, he had lost his position. For months, he struggled with guilt, regret, and the heavy silence of his own mistakes. At first, he tried to escape the whispers and the stares, but they followed him everywhere. Eventually, he moved to a quieter town, taking small jobs to survive. The pride that once filled him was gone. In its place grew humility. He began to treat every person he met with kindness because he had learned, in the hardest way, that a single moment of disrespect could destroy not only others, but also himself. One day, he sat alone in a park with a notebook in his hand. He wrote words that had been living in his heart for months: "To the woman I wronged, I cannot erase what I did. But I have learned. I have changed. I now know that respect is not optional, it is life itself." Though Alan never sent the letter, writing it brought him peace. For the first time, he felt he could breathe again. Back in the city, Maya was invited to speak at a global leadership conference. Thousands of people gathered in a grand hall to hear her words. Cameras flashed, and lights shone, but Maya walked onto the stage with the same calmness she had carried in that small store months before. She began simply. Leadership is not about power. It is not about money. It is about respect. A company is nothing without its customers. A leader is nothing without humility. And no human being deserves to be treated as less than another. The audience sat in silence, absorbing every word. She continued, her voice steady but emotional. I did not choose silence in that store because I was weak. I chose silence because dignity is louder than anger. And when the world watched, it was not my voice that mattered, it was the lesson. Applause erupted, echoing through the hall. People rose to their feet, not only for her words but for the life she had lived. Later that evening, as she stood by the window of her hotel room, Maya looked out at the glittering city lights. She thought of her mother's voice again: respect is worth more than gold. Those words had guided her through hardship, success, and even humiliation. And now, they had become a message for the world. She whispered into the night sky, Mama, they finally understand. Across the country, in homes, schools, and workplaces, people told her story. Parents shared it with children. Teachers used it as an example in classrooms. Business leaders quoted her in meetings. Her calm walk out of the store became a symbol of dignity, and her $5 billion decision became a symbol of justice. Alan, too, heard her speech on the radio in his small apartment. As he listened, tears filled his eyes. He knew he would never meet her again, but he also knew he would live the rest of his life with the lesson she had taught him. He closed his notebook, placed it on his desk, and whispered, Thank you, Maya. The world had moved on, but the story remained alive in the hearts of millions. It was no longer just about one woman or one company. It had become a reminder that respect was the foundation of humanity itself. And so, Maya Roberts lived on, not just as a CEO, not just as a leader of wealth, but as a symbol of strength, dignity, and hope. Her silence that day had spoken louder than any voice could. And her actions had written a lesson that would never be forgotten.